As you might be aware of, there was an election in Germany. And as I'm quite certain you are aware of, Germany is a fairly important country. To be precise, the by far biggest country of the European Union. So what happens in Germany, both in terms of political trends, and there have been some rather worrying such, and in terms of the weight and the policies of Germany inside the European Union, is highly important. Mathias Döpfner is somewhere online. He is entrepreneur, publisher, and I have to say an extremely successful publisher as well. Der Spiegel is a well-known weekly magazine, but nowadays what he has done is to transform his entire publishing enterprise into something that is digital. Politico is all over the world by now, and when I talked to him some time ago, he told me that this paper thing is a very minor thing of what he does. It is the digital publishing and the digital media. Welcome. You can hear me, Mathias?
Hello, Carl. Hello, everybody. I can hear you and see you.
Splendid.
Pleasure to be with you, at least online.
Yes, and we do. It would have been nice to have you here, but we do understand that there have been events in Germany that you have followed on the spot. So just start by that, saying, what's your assessment of the result that came out of yesterday, and the process that is now going to be initiated with the formation of a new German government?
Yeah, thank you, Carl, and again, thank you for having me. Of course, I would have loved to be with you in Kyiv, particularly today, but I have to be in Berlin, had to be in Berlin also yesterday, very late at night, because the election outcome was pretty unclear until the very end. And it was always to be expected that Friedrich Merz will be the next chancellor, that the CDU, which was leading by far in all polls, would be the strongest party. But the decisive question was from the very beginning, in which coalition constellation could that happen? And it really took very long until yesterday, late night, to learn whether the BSW, the new party that was founded by Sarah Wagenknecht, very left-wing and very pacifist and very pro-Russian party, whether they would get above the 5% threshold. And that was important on many levels, because that was the defining factor for potential coalition constellations, and also important in the context of how to handle the Russian war in Ukraine in the next government. It turned out that this party missed the 5% threshold by only 14,000 votes. So it was incredibly close. But now this party is not above the 5%, and with that, not going to be a player in the new parliament. And that was a very important factor. Altogether, I mean, just to begin with, I think it is very clear that this election was the election campaign was very much based on three main topics. The most important topic with regard to the emotional involvement of the German voters was migration, and the failed migration policy in Germany, which also led to anti-Semitism and crime and a lot of disappointment in the German public. So that was the emotionally most important topic. The second topic was the German economy and growth perspectives in the future. And the third topic, indeed, was security policy, and here, most importantly, the war in Ukraine. Now, you could say the outcome is, in a way, ambivalent, in the sense that I would say, from an Ukrainian perspective and from a, I would say, more transatlantic mindset, Western values, let's put it this way, I think it is an outcome that avoids catastrophes, but it also is not an outcome that empowers bold changes and a immediate and significant reform policy. Why? Because the result of the CDU of Friedrich Merz was disappointing. Everything above 30% would have been perceived as a strong and successful result. Everything below 30% was disappointing. No gains for him compared to the situation before he was nominated. So he is at 28.5%. That's relatively weak. The AfD was, as expected, around 20%, so it has doubled its results, but is also not going completely through the roof. So you could say that is in the frame of the expected. Social Democrats and Greens are weak as expected. The very left-wing parties, the Linke and the BSW did not achieve the 5% threshold. The Linke achieved it. So you have now a situation where Merz basically has three coalition options. One is with a radical right-wing AfD. That's not going to happen. The second one is Social Democrats and the Greens. The third one is the most likely one, and I think that's the one that he will try to achieve. That is a grand coalition with the Social Democrats. Now, if I look at that from a Ukrainian perspective or from the perspective of your most important topic, I would say it has negative and positive elements. The negative element is that with regard to the SPD as a coalition partner, there is, let's say, less engagement and less commitment to defense, whatever it costs, against Russia. But the positive thing is that on the opposition side, you have most likely the Greens, which have a very clear view in that context. So I think that is going to balance and is going to help that the opposition is at least not unanimously against all bold initiatives with regard to military support and a stronger European defense concept. So I think that is the short summary to begin with, and perhaps we can go into more details after further questions, Karl.
So in all likelihood, heading for a new big coalition, CDU, CSU and SPD, that will take some weeks, perhaps a couple of months to get together. It's always a rather detailed negotiation or tradition when you form a coalition government in Germany. And there are going to be some critical issues. One of the critical issues that have been there has been the so-called debt break, which is a particular German thing, that there is the constitutional limit on borrowing money or having the budget in debt. And that has been creating difficulties both for sort of defense spending and potentially for aid to Ukraine. Now the parliamentary composition now is slightly complicated because you need 2/3 majority, I think, in the Bundestag to get out of the debt break. How do you see that developing? That must be one of the major issues that Friedrich Merz will have to address, also within his own party, by the way.
Well, I think that's very hard to say, and we should distinguish a little bit official statements from the outcome going forward. My personal prediction would be that there are so many overriding issues to be decided and problems to be solved that this paradigm of the debt break will be sooner or later given up. I cannot see how the challenges going forward can be solved with a strict policy that sticks to this idea of the debt break. And I think that is very likely, even if at the beginning of the coalition negotiations that remains intact and repeated by everybody involved. But I think we need to find a way to at least allow some exceptions.
I was just coming from a meeting of European leaders that is across town here, across the street, more or less, in Kyiv. And there are 14 heads of state and government here in Kyiv today. All of them spoke in terms of further increases in defense spending, 3.5% or something like that. That would be sort of not quite, well, nearly 50% increase in Germany's defense spending if that were to happen. And then, obviously, there will be the need not only to continue support for Ukraine, but also the possibility of stepping up. We don't know where our American friends are. I'm not quite certain they know that themselves, as a matter of fact. But there need to be that readiness. Have those issues been addressed in the German debate during the election campaign, and how do you see them going forward?
Well, it is very clear that Friedrich Merz was one of the few who said the support for Ukraine is unconditional and we have to do more, not less. And also with regard to investments and money that needs to be allocated, but also concretely with regard to weapons, we need to do more and not less. And that is fortunately, and sometimes one could even say surprisingly, a consensus between the Conservative Party, CDU, and the Green Party that actually comes from a more pacifist background and nevertheless is in the context of this historic event taking a very clear and hawkish and supportive position. So I think that is a basis you can build on. As I have said, the Social Democrats, the campaign was to certain parts very much also a campaign for a peace Chancellor Olaf Scholz. And Olaf Scholz will not play a role in the new government. It is more likely that the former or now defense minister Pistorius will play an important role, perhaps even as vice chancellor. And he, given his background and his position in the last month, is, I think, closer to that concept. So I think if we get to this constellation, it should rather be a positive element, and it should be a reason why Germany could become a more reliable and more courageous driver of more support for Ukraine in the EU. Germany as the biggest economy in Europe and the third biggest economy in the world, and everybody is waiting for more leadership within the EU, could and should play a bigger role here. And I think there is a basis to build on.
And Friedrich Merz has been very explicit on his wish to take on a leadership role in the European Union. And with a stable government with a stable majority in place in Berlin, in contrast to some other countries where the situation is going to be somewhat more fragile in the years ahead, there is, in my opinion, no doubt that Berlin will be an even more important place in the years ahead on these and other issues. You are, so is Friedrich Merz, by the way, a strong transatlanticist for X numbers of reasons that I think are obvious to all of us. But if we listen to Friedrich Merz in the last few days, he has been, and that has been in reaction to the, call it political and intellectual turmoil, to have a nice phrase, coming out of the White House in the last few weeks. He's been talking very much in terms of strategic autonomy and things like that. Phrases that we used to hear coming out of Paris, never heard coming out of Berlin, are now coming out of Berlin. How do you see this developing? Is that just a couple of statements for the day, or is that transformation underway, taking into consideration that we've just had a couple of weeks with this experience of the White House in its new incarnation?
Well, of course, certain statements have caused a lot of irritation, and that is also a reason, I think, for these statements that Friedrich Merz has made. I still think, and I said it for many years, that the idea of strategic autonomy can only be a plan B, can only be a second best option, but the strategic alliance of NATO and the strategic alliance between Europe and America, if it is about big geopolitical and security issues, is the fundament of the defense of our values and the defense of the open society model. And we should try everything to make sure that that remains more important than any statement of the day or any constellation of the day. I remember very well when Angela Merkel said many years ago in 2017, after the first Trump election, that the old alliances are gone and Germany has to look for new options. And she mentioned explicitly, with regard to new alliances, Russia as a country that we should reach out to. And we see what that has created. I mean, the dropout of nuclear energy plus the growing dependency of Germany on Russian energy basically strengthened the Putin and financed the Putin that we now have to deal with. I think that was an incredible strategic mistake. And the learning lesson from that is that we should always see the overriding goal, and that is this alliance. And I would not give up too early. I would try to do everything from our side to make sure that the substance of that alliance, if it really matters, remains intact. And that's why I hope that these statements are not necessarily a new concept or a new decision, but more driven by the emotion of the moment.
No, I think most people here would agree with you, but the fact that you use the phrase "not give up too early" also indicates that we are in a situation where there's a need to do some thinking and reflection and see what happens and work on it. The plan B is always a plan B. Plan A should always be plan A, but evidently we are in a slightly confusing situation, to put it in the most diplomatic way, which is very unusual of me, by the way, but it should happen sometimes. One aspect of that particular relationship has been the rather unusual scene that we've seen of senior American, both Elon Musk and J.D. Vance, intervening more or less in the German election campaign in favor of the AfD in a way that, in my opinion at least, has been fairly remarkable. Nothing illegal, you can do that. But it's not what we normally do between democracies, and it caused a lot of tremors. If we look at the election result, it does not seem to have moved the AfD figures, because they are roughly where they were before they started. But you know Elon Musk, and you know a lot of people across the Atlantic. How do you evaluate this? Are they in favor of? I mean, I understand they are not in favor of regime change in Russia, but are they in favor of regime change in Germany?
The short answer is, Carl, I don't know. I don't read their minds. The second aspect that I would like to add, in all fairness, let's also acknowledge that these interferences have happened for many years, in many cases. I remember very direct interference of German leadership in the French election with a clear recommendation for whom to vote. I remember a lot of interferences from many levels, top level, and other spheres like media in the American election with very outspoken messages. So I would take it with a certain discount and say perhaps it's a global world, a global policy landscape, a global communication landscape, and perhaps everybody interferes everywhere. Now, you could say it makes a difference in that case also for whom you interfere. And there I would add, I think that these statements were very much driven by the idea that disruptive energy is healthy and needed. And I think here the role models are Milei in Argentina, another role model maybe Meloni in Italy, and then the kind of outside-in view can easily be, and this disruption is in Germany, the AfD. The thing that is underrated and perhaps simply misperceived is the fact that the AfD, I think, is a party that is not comparable to these movements because it is, at least in parts of the party, a structurally anti-American movement. It is a structurally pro-Russia or pro-Putin movement. It is a pro-China, or to be precise, pro-Xi movement. It is an anti-Israeli movement in parts of the organization and has a very kind of ambivalent, unclear relationship with regard to the German past, to anti-Semitism, to the Holocaust. And some statements and actions have been very disturbing. So that is just a different form of being conservative, of being right, of being disruptive. And I think if you look at it from the other side of the Atlantic, then you may miss the nuances here. And that leads me to my last statement. The good news is it didn't change a thing. The AfD was prior these interventions around 20%, and the AfD is exactly since yesterday midnight at this 20%. So maybe that these interventions, how powerful the interventionists may be, do not really change things. And that's also, I think, a healthy outcome.
I think that was a reassuring thing with the result yesterday. And I agree with you that this disruptive element could be tempting. But if we make the comparison, both Millet and Meloni have come out very strongly in favor of Ukraine. So that sort of pro-Russian element that is very prominent in AfD and FPÖ in Austria, to take something that is fairly nearby, we don't see that elsewhere, thanks God. But it is a disturbing phenomenon. We have also Michael Gahler somewhere here, do we? We have him here. Member of the European Parliament, chairman of the, he's a rapporteur of Ukraine, but apart from that, he happens to be a member of the CDU. So we should congratulate you to the election result.
Thank you very much.
And it's a very nice tie, by the way. Yeah.
And it fits so much to any Ukraine event. That is why I'm wearing it on these occasions. No, but seriously, we have no reason to be satisfied with a result below 30%. Yeah, 15 years ago it was we had 40. Yeah, that's where we are. But that is a huge challenge for the mainstream parties now to address the issues where apparently a lot of voters would like to find solutions. And when it comes to the specific case now with relation to Ukraine, I agree almost to everything that Mr. Döpfner said. There's one issue where I slightly disagree. I think the Ukraine issue only came up in the very last days when, with the turnaround, to avert the word betrayal, from Trump on Ukraine, and then it became an issue. But earlier, the mainstream parties left this discussion to the two pro-Putin parties, to BSW and the AfD, trying to avoid the issue in order to not to get certain voters, probably mostly in the east of Germany, even more inclined to vote for the AfD. I think that was not a good tactic. We should have offensively done it from the outset, and not only reactively when Trump put this change, where we definitely had to react. And when it comes then to the concrete reactions, and it was already referred to with the debt break, the specific German thing, I think in this regard, the European level can be helpful. And I think there is already discussion, and Mrs. von der Leyen referred to that. If we exempt the defense expenditure from the Maastricht criteria, that would give us this relief. So if we allowed, so to say, clearly these expenses to be used, and I would, as a European parliamentarian, I would say, only for those defense expenditures which are commonly procured, because then we have the effect of economies of scale, then we have the effect of better interoperability. So if we commit to plan better together, to procure better together, and then have these positive effects, I would then be inclined to say, let us, for these expenditures, lift the Maastricht criteria and set it aside, and thereby get things done then also on the German level. And it's also easier to have the two-thirds majority. The Greens will go along, no doubt.
Mm-hmm. No, it's clearly going to be a complicated discussion, both from the German constitutional point of view and from the Maastricht criteria. But I think, after all, the result of the election makes it more possible to move forward on this, and I think it's going to be necessary both for defense expenditure and for the Ukraine support.
Yes, and we will also have, I think, a different setup amongst the Social Democrats. If Mr. Pistorius becomes Vice Chancellor, and my wish would be, I'm not involved, Vice Chancellor and Defense Minister, to make it clear what we have to do, where the focus now has to be. If that is him, and Mr. Klingbeil, the next group leader, he is also on another approach than perhaps the hesitant Scholz and the more hesitant, even more hesitant former group leader, Mr. Mützenich. So we have different Social Democrats, hopefully in the lead, together with Friedrich Merz, who has his transatlantic past with BlackRock and so on. I could think perhaps an easy entry to Trump, but when it becomes concrete, it will remain difficult.
Could I ask both of you to try to explain to an interested observer of the German political scene, is there any rational explanation of why the DDR still exists, to phrase it in those terms? Because if you look at the electoral map, it is striking that the DDR territories, or former DDR territory, with very few exceptions, is AFD territory, while AFD's support in Old West is on a more, let's say, slightly more normal European level. We always have these strange parties. So the West is more normal, and the DDR exists. Am I exaggerating?
Well, no, you're not exaggerating. I mean, we have 299 constituencies. All Eastern constituencies but 3 went to the AFD, and in West Germany it's only 2 of all who went to the AFD. So that is very clearly what you described. Well, I mean, I cannot go into deep psychological things of what went wrong in the 30 years. If I'm nasty and I'm seeing the real radical, also Putin supporters there, then I'm telling them, I've told them, well, apparently 2 German dictatorships was not yet enough for you. You need another one. You have some, in German I say Führerentzugserscheinungen, Führer deprivation syndrome or what. I mean, that is unfortunately the case. We have to conduct this very debate. We cannot let it happen. The social media have a very extremely negative impact. That is the troll factories from Moscow, certainly multiplied by AFD and other input. It is incredible, especially from the youth, and I saw it already in the European elections, how this AFD thinking, how that gets into the hearts and minds through TikTok especially, and that is beyond control of the mainstream parties. I mean, the AFD has been the champion in TikTok and Instagram, and we are not following up. And I can imagine perhaps that's the case also in other European countries, but we have to work on that in order to overcome this. Otherwise, in our mindset, we might remain further apart than we have been just after the fall of the wall.
Well, I expect to read interesting analysis of this in Spiegel and Politiker, but please.
No, I agree with everything. And just to add a number to the TikTok phenomenon on TikTok, 78% of the political posts in the last weeks before the election were in favor of AfD. So maybe that's not no coincidence that a social media that is owned by and refers the data of its user to a communist central state is supporting radical, non-centrist, partly non-democratic elements. Why is that so widespread and almost unanimously leading in the eastern states, the former GDR? It's really hard to explain, and you should actually say there are many explanations why the opposite should be the case. Look at Poland, which has also the very recent experience of totalitarian communist leadership, and basically the Poles went together with many other East European countries into a very different direction, where the sense of individual freedom and the sensitivity for new aggressions of totalitarian communist or right-wing movements are leading to a very kind of sensitive attitude towards these developments. In East Germany, the opposite is the case. And I have only one explanation, but that's not in a way an excuse. It seems that too many people in East Germany feel neglected by centrist parties and established political movements. They were basically escaping into a movement where they feel hurt, where they see more recognition. And I fear that this psychology has been amplified by a, I think, strategic mistake that media and politicians of the center made in Germany, and that is to try to avoid the rise of such a movement by completely isolating it. We had just a couple of weeks before the election still the consensus in German media: no interviews with these people, no invitation to TV, and if we just don't give them a voice, then they will stay small and irrelevant. And the absolute opposite was the case. That helped them to develop the status of a martyr. We are the only ones who are speaking up for the people. We are the only ones where the freedom of speech prevails and so on. And elsewhere we are boycotted, discredited. And this outcast feeling, I think, has amplified this consensus in East German countries. That's the party that speaks on our behalf. I find it personally pretty tragic, and it is not only the very right wing, it is also the very left wing. BSW and Linke are also phenomena that are particularly strong in Eastern countries, and 57% of the voters in Eastern Germany have not voted for a centrist Democratic Party, either for the radical left or for the radical right. And that's quite a sad punchline of history. But again, I think we should not try to cure that by criticizing the people. We should rather try to cure it by addressing the topics that they really care about and come up with more convincing solutions than these extremist parties.
And here there are clearly lessons to be learned, not only in Germany, but for all of us, because this is an issue all across Europe.